megawatts, and we count on about 84,000 megawatts in total. There's actually about 115,000 megawatts today, but many of those we don't count because we don't count all of the wind, since the wind isn't always blowing. We don't count all of the solar because in the winter there's often either cloud cover, or as most cases, our peak load occurs after the sun has gone down. So we count about 84,000 megawatts. So 50,000 of a total of 84,000 megawatts were unavailable to us during the storm. Now, at the other end of our system, our distribution partners work with us to make sure that if we need to curtail load, to ask for load shed throughout the system, they work with us to make sure they do that in an appropriate way. Load shed is required when we do not have enough supply to meet all of our demand in the market. Now, what we normally do is when we have outages from generation, we may end up calling upon consumers who have sold us the right to curtail their load. These are typically large industrials who have sold us the right to curtail their load, and we will call on them first. And then after those units, if we have gone through all of those available resources, then at the very end, we may have to call for load shed just to keep the system in balance. Because one of the simple things about an electric system is the most important requirement is that we keep load and generation in balance at all times. If one gets out of sync with the other, then the entire grid has major concerns. So we have to keep those two in balance. So what happened during the storm was we began to call for our distribution partners to engage in their load shed programs. Now, each of them have designed programs that are intended to roll their customers, meaning that no customer should be out for more than, say, an hour at a time. And they're intended to roll those customers. What happened, though, in the storm is that we called on so much of that load shed that they simply ran out. The cupboard was bare. There was no more room available for them to shed any more load. Now, that doesn't mean all of our customers in Texas were offline at the time. Many of our customers, roughly about 60%, are on some sort of protected circuits. Either they're close to hospitals, or they're close to fire stations, or they may be close to a critical fuel infrastructure for the electric grid that we also protect. All of these customers that are on those circuits, they would not share in these load shed plans because those circuits are critical to human life. And so other circuits, though, that have been determined by our distribution providers will be those circuits that they will use for rotating customers to try to respond to this load shed. But as I said, there was too much demand coming from Ercot for more load shed because of the loss of generation. And because of that, customers, instead of being out for an hour at a time, were out for many hours and some for many days. And what happens when those homes then chill down, because when they're out for an hour, the temperature may drop in a home by a few degrees, but then it returns back when that customer is put back online. If those customers are kept off for many hours and even days at a time, their homes chill down to an extraordinary degree into the 40s and some even to the 30-degree range. And when they chill down that cold, it's difficult to bring them back very quickly, simply because each home then now has to race to get back up to 68 degrees or 65 degrees. And as they race to do that, there's a great deal of power consumption that is required to serve that home. And our distribution partners were out there in the field, and they were finding that as they returned these circuits back on, many of those residential consumers, their homes would be competing against each other such that they were overloading the circuits. And many of the circuits had to fail, and some customers went back out of service because of that. So they began to go out and to bring on individual homes one at a time and allow that home to warm up before moving to the next home. As you can imagine, that takes a great deal of time. And in fact, Ercot really stopped on Wednesday of that 5-day week. On Wednesday, Ercot stopped asking for additional load shed, but it took the next 2 days, Thursday and Friday, before those customers could be returned to service, simply because each of those homes were taking time to be restored back from that cold weather. So in the description I've just given you, you can see the root of the solutions. One of the solutions that we must seek is to improve our generators' preparedness for a cold weather event. Now, the media, when they reported it, I believe, got it wrong. What the media said was in 2011, after that most recent 2011 storm prior to 2021, the most recent cold weather we had, in 2011, many of the reporters stated that generators did not learn and they did not weatherize. I would argue to you that most of them did, but they weatherized to 2011. And because 2021 was so much colder, 2011 standards were insufficient. And that's why we lost generation in the state. And so the root of that solution is in improving weatherization at each of our generation facilities. That's one of the issues we have to address. We have to also address improving weatherization at our natural gas facilities that feed our generation, because clearly if we lose the fuel stock to our generators, they also can't operate. And that was part of the problem. A part, not all, but a part of the problem. So the Public Utility Commission, really through the guidance of the legislature and the governor and rules that were passed in the legislative session back this past spring, have been given the authority to set before all generators the requirements of how they should weatherize. And they've done that. They've got a two-phase process. They've finished phase one already. That those requirements have now been layered onto the generation companies. And I would tell you that the generation companies did not wait for those requirements to be in place. Even before the Public Utility Commission set their rules, the generation companies began investing tens of millions of dollars. Each of the major three companies I've talked to, and I'm so happy to say that each of them got started early, late into summer, but early into fall to prepare their units for this winter. Now, the commission, as I said, has passed their rule. The next phase is that Ercot will begin inspecting these units to make sure that they're in compliance with those rules. And from the period of December 2nd to December 23rd, Ercot will have people in the field inspecting over 300 units, which amounts for about 85% of the total lost megawatt hours during the storm. And each of these units, we will be inspecting and making sure that they've met those requirements. And if they fail to do so, we will report them to the commission, and the commission may assess fines of up to $1 million per incident per day. So significant fines that these generators could face if they fail to achieve the standard that has been required of them. Now, at the other end, I've talked to many of our distribution partners, and they have been working to make sure that they have a good load shed plan if that ever occurs again. And of course, our goal, all of our goals would be to make sure that customers are rolled as planned and that they're not out for more than an hour at a time. But all of that depends upon the available supply as well. But that's the goal of everyone, that if we do have a load shed event, that customers would not be out for a long duration of time. Now, many ask me, what does this winter look like? We just went through a 1 in 130-year winter. Many would say, well, this is climate change and we should expect this every year. Others, of course, will say, no, we don't see that. We see this as a 1 in 130-year storm. It's been roughly 130 years since the major storm of this type. And so what we have done, I know many of you have probably heard from the Farmer's Almanac. I've joked that the Farmer's Almanac is, they basically counted hairs on a woolly caterpillar, but they did determine that we would have a difficult winter. But let's step away from the Farmer's Almanac. My own team of meteorologists that are looking at this issue have come back. And what they've indicated to me is that this winter, we should expect to have in January and February of those 2 months, 1 to 2 major cold weather events. Those events are not 2021, but they could be like 2011, which in itself, as you know, was a significant cold weather event. So we're getting prepared for that. As I told you, we're doing a number of things to be prepared. I cannot guarantee for anyone on the phone that we would not have load shed in a similar event. But what I can guarantee you is that it will be handled much better this time than it has been handled in this past year. Now, I've talked a lot about this past winter because that's where most of our minds are. That's where our heads are today. But let me talk to you about some work that's being done for the future of Texas. Really for not this year, but next year and a year after that, and many years down the line. We have the incredible good fortune that we have a lot of sun and a lot of wind in Texas. We also have a great business climate. As many of you know, here in the Waco area, we have a fantastic business climate, which is driving businesses to relocate to our areas, which is driving some of these new businesses that Seth talked about a minute ago to locate and bring new jobs in. And those businesses are driving an incredible economy. And with all of that movement of new load to Texas, as well as the drive for new technologies to come, such as solar and wind generation, our grid is changing in an extraordinary way. Part of what we have to do at Ercot is be prepared for that. Not this year, but many years down the line. We have to think far enough forward. Many of you know that it takes roughly 6 years to build transmission. We have to think far enough forward that we're beyond that 6 years, planning our system, making sure that that transmission is in place before it is needed, and making sure that we get all of the right tools to balance this new type of wind and solar generation, to make sure that at night when the sun goes down, and it will every single night, when it goes down, we have the generation necessary to keep the system in balance and continue to serve customers through the night and into the next morning and all 24 hours. So what's happening at the commission today is really looking forward. A lot of the work that the Public Utility Commission done has so far was already focused on the winter, and they've got that off their plates. Now today, they are looking forward at how the market design should change to make sure that we have the right types of generation available to us at Ercot so we can manage our system reliable for many years in the future. One of the reasons I've been going around the state, and I have been going all around the state, yesterday I was in College Station, and a few days before that I was up in Dallas, and I've been to Midland, Odessa, and I will be going to Corpus Christi and San Antonio very soon. And the reason why I'm traveling around the state is because I want to start the process of rebuilding your trust in Ercot. And we lost trust during the storm. I don't expect to rebuild your trust in this our economy, but I expect to be able to begin that process. But to earn your trust, we have to do it this winter. We have to operate well next winter, and we have to operate well for the next 100 years. It is not something we can do very quickly, but I want to start that with you today. Seth, let me turn to you. If you would help to coordinate the questions, and we'll go straight to questions from here on. And we've got about 20 minutes, everyone.
Correct. Yes, and we actually have some great questions out there. And you guys feel free to keep asking those questions, and we'll get to them. So first up, it is, let's see, in 2021, winter, okay, hang on. Understood, many generation plants were offline for maintenance going into the winter of 2021. Is there an opportunity to better plan this?
So that's been a misunderstanding by some in the public. Those units weren't off for maintenance. Those units were down because of outages. Okay, some of them were cold weather related. Some had other problems. There are very few units that were actually on a maintenance outage, and those units are the types of units that actually shut down in usually in October, and they don't come back to the system until the late spring. So there were just very few that were in that category. So that's a misconception. These units were broken, and they had to, as I've said, they had a flat tire. They had to pull to the side of the road, and they had to change that tire.
Excellent. Okay, next up we have someone who has read that natural gas companies have a loophole and they allowing them to not have to winterize and they can opt out by paying a fee. Is this correct, or can you shed some more light on that?
Well, I won't say it's incorrect, but let me describe some details around it. What you are referring to is a draft rule by the Railroad Commission. They haven't finalized it. In fact, they intend to finalize it, I believe, on November 30th. So just a week and a half or 2 weeks away, they will finalize the rule, and so then we'll know for certain where they are. The Railroad Commission draft rule, though, did get a lot of attention from members of the Senate, and the legislature weighed in very strongly that they wanted to see some changes in that rule. They weren't comfortable with that $150 allowance for people to get out of weatherization. And so they have weighed in on that. I do not know yet where the commission will go, where the Railroad Commission will go, but I do expect that they'll do the right thing to protect reliability.
Great. Okay. Next up, we have, and this is something we're actually very familiar with, is interest from crypto miners in the community. Is it safe to say that that is a particular industry that is subject to load shed?
Yeah, well, even more so. So let me explain crypto miners. Well, no, that sounded too big. I'm not going to explain crypto miners. I will explain how they work with the electric industry. Crypto miners are a fantastic resource for Ercot because they are extremely price sensitive. So unlike any other data center, which they can't just shut down because they lose data and they lose processing capabilities, a crypto miner can shut off in a moment's notice. And they will do so very soon if they see prices rising. So the advantage is when you're in Texas, we have oftentimes we have too much wind generation and too much, and ultimately could be too much solar generation as well. And when those situations might occur, prices go negative. Throughout the entire state of Texas, there have been negative prices, which means that a consumer of electricity that is price sensitive could actually consume and get paid to do so. Now, I won't go into the reasons for that. It has a lot to do with taxation and the federal government and their incentive programs. But stepping aside from that, what it does for Bitcoin or cryptocurrency mining is it provides a great location for them to absorb some of that low cost, even negative price power. And then when Ercot gets into a situation where we need power, where it gets scarce and the price begins to rise, they are very quick to turn their facilities off. So if they avoid the cost, but to us, it's like a voluntary shed of load that helps us to restore generation elsewhere.
Absolutely. And we've actually, I laughed at that a little bit because we've actually been approached by a number of crypto miners, these 50, 60, 100 plus megawatt miners. I mean, in some cases, even more than that. And but something that they did mention as part of the pitch was that they have a lot of generation capacity on site through backup generators and such. And so I don't know if this is right or wrong, so this is sort of a question. They have indicated that during those periods of time when other forms of generation or when rates are high, they can actually turn off their own devices, yet run those generators and put energy back into the grid and make money that way. Is that a fair statement?
That's a possibility. Now, I haven't seen most Bitcoin miners take that approach. Most of them have just recognized that they will just shut down when prices get high. But if they do want to invest in those generation facilities, that's equally a way for them to manage their cost and also benefit the grid itself.
Great. Okay. Yeah, good questions coming in here. So next up, we've got an individual who says they enjoy using the Ercot app. How it shows demand and capacity graphs for the Ercot service area. His question is, do you plan to increase the information available on that app? And yes, do you plan to increase the information available on that app? He thinks it would be very helpful.
Well, that's actually great to hear because I've been wanting to kill off that app. So it's great to hear that you have that you're getting a lot of information on it. But I would point you to a place you could get much more information. So if you go to our website, I'm going to see if I can walk you through it while we talk here real quick. If you go to the Ercot website, we have something that we call a dashboard. And the dashboard has a great deal of information for you. So go to the site and then go into grid information. And there on that site, there's a little box that says view dashboards. When you go to view dashboards, there are I think about 7 or 8 charts that give you just a wealth of information about what's going on in the market. And you can see how much, actually you can see weather forecasts for every major area of Ercot. You can see on that list where prices are throughout Texas. You can see how much wind and how much solar is being produced up to the minute and how much we're expecting. And you can see system demand and ancillary services. So just a great deal of information. I would urge you to go there because ultimately, if we keep the app, which I've almost been convinced by you alone as a speaker, but I've been thinking a lot about it. If we keep it, I want the app to become like this dashboard that we have on our website. And so I'd hope you look there for more information. Thank you.
Great response. Thank you. Next question. Okay, so the question is just basically asking the goals to reestablish trust. You had mentioned you traveled all over the state to do so. I think it may be some folks and maybe the general population is struggling to get more information about when and where these conversations are happening. Is there a resource out there, or how is that information being pushed out?
So I haven't made anything available, and it's I'm not sure if I made the right decision, but here's the way I thought of it, Seth, and really the questioner as well, is that if I get invited to someone's party, I don't invite my friends to their party. And so if the city of Waco would want to invite me in so that they could have their constituents come in and ask me questions, I don't promote that myself. It's not for me to ask other people to come to that session. I do know that I've got an event in Waco, and I'm sure that we'll be able to have the local folks broadcast that, as well as San Antonio and other places. But so far I've decided to let them communicate that rather than myself. If you would like, Seth, if you would like to share a list with your folks, if they want to reach out, I'd be happy to provide that list as it stands today to your team of the cities and locations where we'll be. And then I'll leave it to your team to figure out how to get to the right locations, how to invite themselves to the party.
Sure. Yeah, we'll take that, and we'll see how we can get that information disseminated to the right folks. So yeah, that's all right. So we've got another question here. This one is another good one. So can you elaborate on the percentage of capacity that actually failed during Winter Storm Uri related to the then available energy sources? So he provides an example.
Right.
For example, how much was coming into the grid at storm time from gas and coal and nuclear and wind and solar, and how much of those went offline as a result of the storm?
So I can give you a few. I don't have it all memorized, so I can give you a few of those numbers. We lost about 15,000 megawatts of wind. Now, wind, we didn't lose wind because of cold weather. Interestingly, we lost wind because of icing. I know those two are related, but it's because of frozen rain or freezing rain that we lost 15,000 megawatts. Now, why is that? It's similar to if you go to the airport today. If you go to the airport on a freezing day, if there's freezing rain around, your flights will be delayed and may even be canceled, simply because those airfoils, those wings, cannot operate well with ice on them. It's the same for wind turbines. They use an airfoil to drive those wind turbines, and they do not work well, and it can damage those units if they operate with ice on those blades. So we lost about 15,000 because of the freezing rain, not just because it was cold. Now, many people ask, well, how's it they have wind turbines in Minnesota and they don't face the same problem? And it's a very simple answer. Meteorologically speaking, they have much less freezing rain in Minnesota than we do down here. It's because of the moisture, right? It's a much drier area. They have much less freezing rain up there. And so because of that, they have less concerns with their wind turbines in that environment. So 15,000 megawatts from there. On solar, we only had about 2,000 to 3,000 megawatts of solar at that time. Now, interestingly, I should let you know that today we have over 9,000 megawatts of solar. So just in the last 6 months, we have built out 7,000 megawatts of solar, but we have between 2,000 and 3,000 at that time. And some of the solar can be said that it was impacted by snow, but really, I think the way we should describe it is that the event really happened overnight. Our peak in the winter happens in the dark. In the summer, of course, it's in the light, but in the winter at 5 p.m., it's getting dark. And so there was really no support from solar at that time. Natural gas had thousands of megawatts of outages due to frozen equipment and breakages, those kinds of things. I don't have the number for you on that, but I can give you a sub part of that number. People have asked me how much of natural gas was impacted by the lack of fuels. And that was roughly about 7,000 megawatts of natural gas because of lack of fuels. But there was, my guess would be another 20,000 or more of natural gas that was off due to broken elements. There was some coal that was off. I don't have that number, but I will tell you that there was one nuclear unit that failed because of the cold weather, and that took about 1,300 megawatts off. So that was one of the 4 nuclear units in the state.
Great information. We do have one more question, and I've got another question to follow up on this one with. The last question that we have typed here, and again, folks, feel free to keep sending those questions in, was there a reason that winterization sufficiency was not revisited post 2011, given that the weather trends indicated there could be more extreme weather in the future?
So after 2011, standards were written for weatherization based on the 2011 event. As I said, it had been the most severe that we'd seen in the last 20 years. And so the standards were developed off of that cold weather. It wasn't revisited because between 2011 and 2021, we didn't have any indication that we even get near that. We continued to have some years intervening in there where it got cold. There were a few years where it got close to a 2011 event, but nothing really beyond 2011. And so no additional work was done on that.
Sure. And so we just got another question. Are there any plans to tie our grid, the Texas grid, the Ercot, into other USA grids in critical areas?
Good. Yeah. This question comes up a lot, and it's a fantastic question. Unfortunately, I'm looking at 5 minutes. So usually I give a very long story that goes along with this, but you're gonna have to miss the story. But it was a good one, trust me. But let me directly answer your question. During the storm, well, let me start again. But we are not interconnected with the rest of the nation. And during the storm, we do have 2 interconnections that are DC ties that allow a controlled amount of power, meaning that we can actually control exactly how much moves either direction. We had power imports coming in across those 2 ties during the storm. But because our neighboring areas got into trouble, just like we did, and began to have load shed in their own areas, they are allowed under our contracts with them to cut those schedules of power flowing into Texas. And they did that. We don't hold it against them because we would have done the same to them in this environment. If we had power exiting Texas, we would have stopped it during the storm. But since they cut those schedules, I think it's a good example of how being interconnected for this storm, and I say that specifically because there might be a different storm that would be a different answer, but for this storm, being interconnected would not have improved our situation in Texas. And in fact, the FERC agreed with that. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in Washington, D.C. just yesterday released their study on what happened throughout all of the center part of the nation, not just Texas, but from Minnesota down, all of the center part. And one of the things they said in that study was that they doubted that any of the power that was traveling from the east to the west to serve these cold weather areas would have made it to Texas because it would have been absorbed in those surrounding regions that were also in trouble.
Absolutely fair. Completely understand. So I think I'll spare my question for a later conversation. I think my question was just in relation to nuclear power. I'm probably a little bit biased. My mother was actually involved in the industry and teaching radiation safety for years and years and years. So I grew up hearing about it, but I do wonder sometimes why nuclear is not, especially with the new Gen 4 stuff that's out there, why it's not more of an option on the table, or why it's not being discussed more as a generation source than it is. And maybe I'm just not part of those circles. Maybe it's already being discussed, but I'm a little bit curious.
A long answer. I'm going to keep it to 3 minutes, though, Seth. So it's a very long answer, in fact. So there are a number of things that are working against the nuclear industry in Texas. Number one, public perception. Okay, that's a difficult thing to overcome for a lot of people. Public perception about having a nuclear plant near it. For a competitive area like Texas, the very difficult part of that equation is that generators don't have customers like in a regulated area. They don't have customers that are stuck to them, right? In the regulated area, those customers can't leave. In Texas, a customer can leave if they don't like the price. But because of that, a generator that needs a significant revenue to manage their cost over, say, 20 years, they really need a customer base that they can rely on to be there for the future. Otherwise, it becomes too big of a risk for the investors. So we still see some developments in some of the regulated areas, but not in the competitive areas. And then the third thing, and I would say probably the most important, is years ago I was working on building a renaissance in nuclear. And this was before the disaster at Fukushima in Japan. And what it required was that we rebuild the nuclear industry, the nuclear components, the development side of it, the people that would build turbines and generators and those kinds of things, because all of them had left the US. They were all overseas. Many of them were in China. And because we didn't have that native industry that could supply that equipment and that could reduce lag times and supply chain issues, it was very difficult to build nuclear here. So we began this renaissance of, rebuilding some of these facilities, rebuilding the talent, restarting with universities where they began to retrain for nuclear engineers, which they had stopped doing for a number of years. Rebuilding that support system within the US, and then Fukushima happened and it all went away. And today, if you went to one of those folks that made those investments and said, we'd like you to do it again, they would tell you, not now. We're not going to do it now. The risk is too high for them as well. And that's probably the major reason why nuclear has not really grown in the US.
Again, a very fair answer. And Brad, I'll just say thank you for taking the hard questions. We appreciate your transparency and your candid responses and all of these things. It's a very interesting time. We're thankful to have Ercot's leadership in this. I will share here in a moment the link to the roadmap. I believe that you guys have listed the number of, I think there were 60 plus bullet points of information and steps that are being done as a result of the February storm. And I believe most of those have been done. So I have a high level of confidence going into the winter period, hopefully not too many storms. And again, thankful for folks like you and everyone else out there that are working on these things and thinking about these things. And so I think we are just a little bit over on our time, but we appreciate all of you guys joining us. Brad, again, a huge thank you for taking time out of your day to share with us. We've got a lot of excellent feedback from folks who appreciated what you had to share. Again, I'll just briefly thank our sponsors, and American Guarantee Title and Kelly Realtors, who are our two presenting sponsors, and then the Cohen Mortgage Group, who is our gold sponsor. And again, all of these folks, great supporters of the Chamber and economic development and everything that we do. They make events like this possible. So if you need those services, please reach out to those folks. And then I'll also offer that if anyone has follow-up questions, You can email me if you don't already have my info. It's smorris@wacochamber.com. Pretty easy. And just shoot me an email, and we'll see what we can do to get those answers for you. And I think we'll leave it at that. So again, thank you, and have a great Thanksgiving.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.